Welcome to part 4 of this Maritime Great Britain production of the life of Admiral Nelson. On the 11th of May 1805, Nelson and 10 ships of the line began a journey west. Acting without Admiralty orders and on his own initiative, he made for the Caribbean in pursuit of Admiral Villeneuve. The French had arrived off Martinique on the 13th and met up with the Spanish fleet. Admiral Villeneuve now waited to be joined by other French ships before heading towards the Channel in force. After wasting time searching for the French based on poor information, Nelson finally had conclusive intelligence that the French had begun their journey east, and so he began his return journey. The long chase was over without the decisive action that Nelson so desperately wanted. On the misty morning of the 22nd of July off Cape Finisterre, Admiral Villeneuve's fleet met with the appropriately positioned ships of Admiral Sir Robert Calder. The two fleets engaged in what was to become a controversial action, and one that would ruin the reputation of Admiral Calder. Outnumbered and in heavy fog, Calder took on the enemy, but the result was not the decisive action that the nation craved. There was no annihilation, no absolute victory. As evening fell, Calder gave the order to cease fire. The visibility was still poor and his ships were battered, but he had captured 2 Spanish ships for the loss of no British vessels and prevented the combined fleet from continuing towards the Channel. On the 22nd of August, Villeneuve, with his battered fleet, limped into the Spanish port of Cadiz to refit, restock and await the next set of orders from Napoleon. After the failure of his ambitious naval plans to support an invasion of England, Bonaparte decided to abandon the attempt and to take La Grande Armée east. On the 15th of August, Nelson discovered that once again he had missed Villeneuve, and so, leaving his squadron with Admiral Cornwallis and the Channel Fleet, he headed home, eventually reaching Merton Place on the morning of the 20th of August. This was to be his last return. On the evening of Friday the 13th of September, Nelson left Emma, their daughter Horatio, and Merton Place for the final time and headed to Portsmouth. The Victory weighed anchor on the morning of the 15th of September, and as the Victory headed down the Channel towards the Atlantic, Nelson must have taken his last look at England, focused on the task ahead of him. Further frustrated by what Napoleon saw as Villeneuve's incompetence, he ordered for him to be replaced. Villeneuve may not have been a great commander, but he was a man of honour, and rather than suffer the indignity of being relieved of his command, he endeavoured to carry out his last orders and to move his fleet into the Mediterranean. As the morning of the 21st of October dawned, the British fleet began the long and slow approach towards the French and Spanish. Nelson spoke to his signal lieutenant John Pascoe. His lordship came to me on the poop. He said, "Mr. Pascoe, I wish to say to the fleet, England confides that every man will do his duty," and added, "You must be quick, for I have one more signal to make, which is for close action." Lieutenant Pascoe explained that the word confides would have to be spelt out, and suggested replacing it with the word expects, as it would require fewer flags. Nelson agreed, and the signal flags were hoisted. Admiral Collingwood's division broke the line, and the Royal Sovereign fired its first broadside into the Spanish ship Santa Ana at 12:20 p.m. A little later, it was Nelson's turn to join the fight. The Victory approached the enemy at the head of the weather column and broke the line, firing into Admiral Villeneuve's flagship, the Beau-Centaure. As Nelson's ship moved past the Beau-Centaure, it became entangled with the French ship Redoutable, and a fierce battle between the two began. On the Victory's quarterdeck, as Captain Hardy turned, he noticed that Nelson was no longer by his side. He saw the Admiral lying on the deck. The time was 1:15 p.m. A musket ball fired from the Redoutable had struck Nelson on the left shoulder, torn through his gold epaulet and penetrated his chest, lodging in his lower back. "They have done for me at last, Hardy. My backbone is shot through." The Admiral was then carried below to the sick bay on the orlop deck of the Victory. He insisted on waiting his turn for treatment with the other men, according to the first-come, first-served tradition of the Navy. During the hours of battle, Nelson clung on to life. He asked that his hair be given to Lady Hamilton, along with his possessions. He repeatedly asked for Captain Hardy, who had been forced to withdraw back to the deck as his duty demanded. When Hardy eventually returned, they shook hands, and Nelson asked how the day was going. "Very well, my lord," Hardy replied. "We have got 12 or 14 of the enemy ships in our possession." "I hope," said Nelson, "that none of our ships have struck." "No, my lord, there is no fear of that." Hardy returned to the weather deck of the Victory. Throughout Nelson's suffering, he repeatedly remarked, "Thank God I have done my duty." Dr. Beatty, the Victory surgeon, described perhaps the most touching episode of Nelson's last moments. He then told Captain Hardy he felt that in a few minutes he should be no more, adding in a low tone, "Don't throw me overboard." The captain answered, "Oh no, certainly not." "Then," replied his lordship, "you know what to do. Take care of my dear Lady Hamilton. Kiss me, Hardy." The captain now knelt down and kissed his cheek. When his lordship said, "Now I am satisfied. Thank God I have done my duty," Captain Hardy stood for a minute or two in silent contemplation. He then knelt down again and kissed his lordship's forehead. "God bless you, Hardy." The news of the great victory at Trafalgar and of Nelson's loss reached London in the early hours of November the 6th. On hearing the news, the king was rendered speechless. The population was grief-stricken. Even the news of the greatest naval victory ever couldn't compensate for the loss of Nelson. On January the 9th, 1806, Admiral Lord Nelson was laid to rest under the mighty dome of St. Paul's Cathedral in London.